Welcome to the Mastering Leadership webinars, and lovely to see all of you again. As you're coming in, just type into the chat box where you're from and how much you missed us in the last 2 months when we didn't have leadership webinars. But we're very happy to be back in the space and into our leadership webinars. Our speaker today is Ram, and Ram's going to talk about powerful questioning. And included in the panel is me and Venkat and Vijay. So at some part, we're all going to join the panel, but for now, we will let Ram start and introduce the topic. And of course, we have some questions for you to also engage with us in. And over to you, Ram.
Okay. I just sent a happy Thanksgiving message with a wrong spelling, but hopefully that's okay.
Are we surprised, Cindy, that Ram misspelled Thanksgiving with the evening that he's having? Okay,
well,
sorry.
Yeah, it was just a G instead of a K, so it doesn't matter. That's the way I pronounce thanks anyway, so that's fine. So, okay, let's start with this. I'm eternally grateful to ICF for having taken out the competency that earlier used to be called powerful questioning. For those who are very familiar and use the code words and so on, it used to be the CC6, Core Competency 6. And it was something that by having replaced it, ICF has sent a very, very clear message that there is no such thing as powerful questioning. It's a myth. And there are people who sort of wax eloquent on how powerful questioning can be. And there are people who publish 20 powerful questions, if you master them, how you can become a master coach. And there are those I know who sell cards with powerful questions, and you pick out one question, and that question should help you through a coaching session. If there's a bigger scam, I don't know of one. Fundamentally, I think there is only one extremely powerful quality that one requires as a coach. And that quality is listening. It's not about questioning. Through powerful listening or active listening, what comes up as a curious, spontaneous, observant, caring, empathetic inquiry or an exploration with unconditional positive regard is what becomes a powerful question. Unless you understand that as a coach or a learner coach, the mastery journey is, or the destination of a mastery in the journey is going to elude anyone who's trying for that. So I would like to start not so much with questioning, and I would invite a panel later to come on and talk about it. We can talk about various questions, like Cindy has this thing about the why question and coming from various people, and we'll try and answer those kind of questions that you may be struggling with. But at the first level, I just would like to tell all of you who are learner aspirants who are on their journey to coaching, one of the questions that I have often faced with learners in the early stages of learning is, I don't know how to ask powerful questions. There's no need to ask powerful questions. If you're just natural, and as I said, if you are whatever, spontaneous, curious, etc., whatever comes up for you at that point in time, in the context of what the client has said, would result in a powerful question because your listening is powerful. And probably the best structure or the framework that has been laid down for listening is not even by a coach, but a thought leader on learning, Otto Scharmer. I would recommend every one of you to please Google Otto Scharmer's The 4 Levels of Listening YouTube video, roughly about 20 minutes. It's probably the best time that you have ever invested in terms of your coaching journey. Scharmer builds in some ways on what Carl Rogers has said in terms of his client-centric listening modes. And there are others in the past who have talked about Stephen Covey on levels of listening, Laura Whitworth in coactive coaching. But what Otto Scharmer says is probably the most relevant as far as coaching is concerned. So let me take you through that a bit, set the foundation for what we are about to talk in terms of powerful listening. Scharmer says the first stage of listening, he calls it downloading. I call it judgmental listening. Both mean the same thing. 80% of us, 80% of the time, indulge in this. In terms of listening selectively to what we want to hear, to confirm what we already know. We're not looking for anything new. We are just looking to satisfy ourselves, or that we are right, or what we are right in the way that we look at another person. I thought this person was no good. I'm listening to that person, picking out those words which are relevant to that person being no good. So I'm now happy. And I'm very secure that the person is no good, or the person is good. So the judgmental listening is what in neurolinguistic programming would be called based on deletion, distortion, and selective generalization. And it's a worst form of listening. You are full of yourself, totally selfish, self-centric, egocentric. And as Scharmer says, he draws a circle with a red dot in the center. The listener is sitting with arms completely folded. I don't want to hear anything other than what I believe in. If that reminds you, one of the global leaders who's thankfully on his way out, 100% of the time, saying exactly doing that. That is what judgmental listening, downloaded listening is. And that's a beginning of Scharmer calls absencing, with closed mind, closed heart, and closed will. The next level of listening Scharmer talks about is what he calls as curious listening. In the circle, from the center, you move to the periphery, as if you are looking out of the window, trying to see what else is out there. Is there something that I do not know that I would like to know? It's certainly better, far better, but at the same time, it is still very much a self-centered exercise, because what we are looking out to see, is there anything out there that could benefit me most of the time? And it's pretty much the way that a scientist or a researcher would look at the world, trying to figure out something new. Not perhaps necessarily benefiting anybody else, but for their own benefit in some way. Sometimes out of sheer curiosity, it's possible. That's what curious listening is. It's certainly better. That's a beginning of reasonably okay kind of listening in a conversation. Am I listening for things I do not know about, rather than just selectively listening to things that I want reconfirmed? I have made a judgment that I'm now collecting evidence to prove my judgment is correct. The third level of listening, like Scharmer says, is the minimum requirement for a coach. Absolutely the minimum requirement for a coach, where you see the listener sitting outside that circle and you move up to that listener, speaker, the client, the friend, whoever, the mentee. And then you start listening to that person to understand who that person is, where that person is coming from, trying to put yourself in his shoes, her shoes, in their skins. And that's a very, very, very first step of decent listening, coach-like listening. And that listening he calls as the empathetic listening, which in the Rogerian definition is the third and the highest level of listening. Scharmer goes beyond that for the first time that I have read or heard about, to a fourth level that's called generative listening. The generative listening, Scharmer says, is are we able to see that person the way that person wishes to be, and be able to envision that person, to be able to listen to that person in the shape of what that person could be, what could be the emerging future for that person as a client. And if we as coaches, we are able to see that in the client with complete unconditional positive regard, that is really the height of coaching. You don't have to do anything else. When you are in that space, you're totally focused on and in to the client. And all that occupies your frame is the client out there and the client's issues, the way the client wishes to be. For those of you who are from India and who might be familiar with some of the mythology, in the Mahabharata, there is a particular scene which is described in the Bhagavad Gita as well, where Krishna, the Lord, divine incarnate, reveals himself to Arjuna, who is the human incarnate, in his glorious defined form, which is terrifying, at one level, and it's enormously powerful at another level. Generally, it is construed as something that Krishna does to show Arjuna how powerful Krishna is. My view is completely different. What he's trying to show Arjuna is what Arjuna can become, what that human can become in the shape of a divine. And that is really what generative visioning, generative listening is about. If you are able to get into that space, and we are able to listen to the person, to see that person in their emerging future, there is nothing more that needs to happen. You are one with a client in total congruence, in total empathy, in total unconditional positive regard. So in coaching, I'll stop with this next step, what I'm going to talk about. Cindy and I have been working with various mastery cohorts and independently on some of the people being developed as PCCs and ACTPs. We have found the simplest way to do that, for the sake of a framework, we are putting it in an acronym kind of stuff as LASI framework. The L stands for listening and observing. The A stands for accepting, acknowledging, and appreciating. The S stands for sensing and sharing, and the I stands for inquiring and exploring. If we are able to partner the client with this framework, first, listening to the client and observing the client in an empathetic, in a curious, empathetic, generative way, and accepting the client, whatever the client is saying, with unconditional positive regard, acknowledging what the client is saying by picking up some of the words that the client has used, not transforming, translating them, changing the transmission in terms of the coach's own words, but using exactly what the client has said, reproducing them, and then sharing with the client what the coach senses at that point in time, non-judgmentally, without a bias, and very gently, very humbly, asking the client, curiously, empathetically, what's really going on, what may need to happen, as an inquiry or an exploration which is deeper. And in this, we generally advise learners, you use what is a time-tested organizational development model format of ACT, which is about what's happening as sensations in your body, what is coming up as emotions in your mind space or heart space, and what's coming up as thoughts in your mind space. So a combination of this framework, listening, acknowledging, sharing, and inquiring using the ACT format, is what leads to a powerful question. It doesn't have to be a clever question. It doesn't have to be a stupid question like if the client says, I don't know, the coach tries to be very smart and say, what if you had a magic wand? What if you had a friend who knows what the answer would be? I mean, these are the most moronic kind of questions one can think of. And still, there are people who post them out in various blogs, and even if you Google as 20 powerful questions, these are some other things come up. If the client doesn't know, the client doesn't know. It's much better for a coach to accept saying, I too don't know. Why don't we explore this together? As you say this, I don't know, what's happening? What's the sensation that you're having in your body? What is the emotion that is coming up for you? What are the thoughts that are coming up for you? A simple exploration like that would probably throw up far more spaces of awareness than asking, what will you do if you had a magic wand? So I'll stop here. Left to myself, I can go on forever, but let me ask Cindy, Venkat, and Vijay to join, and any of the questions that you have asked in the panel, in the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to engage with Vijay and Venkat in a minute, but Ram, I'm going to pick up what you were saying a bit later, because there were some valuable pieces there. But for now, I'm going to engage with everybody on the chat. Please go ahead and answer this question. I'd love to hear from all of you. We're talking about powerful questions. Who is the question powerful for? What do you think? Who's the question powerful for? Yeah? And Vijay, I know how much you love this topic of powerful questions. And you're probably dying to say something as an introduction to powerful questions. What is it you want to say?
Thank you, Cindy.
I'm watching the chat. I'll watch the chat. You talk.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, right now I'm just feeling very conscious. There's a lot of noise that's coming in. So my apologies for that. And if I'm not very clear, please let me know. So, if you go back to the classic definition of powerful questioning, and I'm sort of underlining questioning, not questions. And go back to the full text of the earlier core competencies, right? It's simply about questions that I don't remember the exact words, but that bring in and offer maximum benefit to the coaching relationship and the client. So I'm actually answering something you've asked. And that to me is a guiding light, because you're not just talking about questions that offer maximum benefit to the client, but you're also talking about that relationship and partnership. So in some ways, I think you can't take out the coach from the partnership. So that's something I just want to leave as context. And yeah, while I do agree with Ram that I think the word powerful questioning has been removed, and it is just finds a place in passing in the competency of evoking awareness as one of the tools and techniques that allow for learning and insight of the client. I think it's just one amongst the many. But that being said, if and I've recently been studying the new PCC markers. If you really look at, the subtext or the markers of, CC7, yeah, it's a direct sort of mix of whatever was there. I would say 60% of what was there in powerful questioning and about 40% of direct communication. So pretty much, I mean, I think all of it is there. It's just not called as powerful questioning. So I don't know what that helps with. But I really, as a learner coach, I used to find it very useful because it allowed me to understand that one tool in entirety. I mean, and while it's quite commonsensical, and I remember this thing that I believe common sense is not that common. So it's important to state it. Very simple things like, should not be a leading question, right? It cannot be, it needs to be a question that's open-ended, right? Does not contain an answer or a direction. I found these things quite useful because some of it is also practice. Because in our regular day-to-day conversations, we are so used to leading without actually leading. So I still hold, I think, powerful questioning as an important tool. I usually fall back in whenever I'm with my clients. And I think it adds a lot of value to our whole partnership, I feel. Yeah, I just want to stop there, Cindy.
Venkat, you? Mute, Venkat.
Thanks, Cindy. And Vijay has covered, very precisely. I'll add on a couple of things. Is that the way I also look at it is that powerful question is something. Sometimes we all make too much out of it, but sometimes it can be as simple as a question, and I'll just come to it. People think that a powerful question is something which is a long-winded question which makes the client think and react. Sometimes a powerful question can simply be saying, what else? Is there anything more that comes into your mind? If you look at the framing of that sentence, it doesn't look very complicated, doesn't look, it's a very, very simple matter of fact. But what it does, I think a question is powerful if it can make the client introspect, move ahead in the journey, and bring about something new for the client. And many a times we all, many of us in our own journey, we all think when we go through it is that, when it goes through CC 1, 2, 3, 4, that a powerful question is something which comes up somewhere in the middle, after you have done CC 2 and then you come to, 5, 6. But really speaking, a powerful question is something which can be even the third or the fourth question at the beginning of the session itself. Because a powerful question can also be useful to make a client, typically when a client starts and is all over the place, and even the problem statement or what is it that the client is looking for in that session is not very clear, a question can actually open up the client to hit the real problem that he or she wants to address in that session. So a powerful session can come anywhere, can be as simple as saying anything more, what else? So it's a contextual question which makes the client think and move ahead, gives some insight, and makes the coaching process move ahead in the journey.
Thanks, Venkat and Vijay. So coaches, in answering your question, and of course to everyone in the panel, feel free to also reflect on this so that you can share your thoughts. In answering that question, whose questions or what are questions really powerful for in what value is being received out of it? So what are questions powerful for? Coach or client, coaching relationship? And one of the things I'd like to, it always reminds me of, a client can bring a topic to a session. And if there's nothing really powerful, or maybe this word thought-provoking or creative in the session, then the client will leave with exactly what they brought in, right? And these words around the PCC markers, the current one that we're using, always resonates with me around how we help our clients move forward. And, it's the coach's questions, help the client to explore beyond their current thinking to new or expanded ways of thinking, either about themselves or about the desired outcome or about the topic they're bringing. But these words expand beyond to new or, beyond the current thinking to new or expanded ways of thinking. It's an exploratory way, it's an exploratory process that goes beyond. And I like this word expanded because, think about all the ripple effects of expanded. The client goes away with, or firstly, the client that brings a big topic, it gets the coach will have the client narrow it down. And of course, expanded can include the meaning of the topic for the client. And new thinking would lead to new awareness, new actions, new learnings. So as word expanded is some sort of ripple effects in coaching. So coaches, for you, here's a question. Normally we say in coach training, we say to student coaches, learner coaches, don't ask why questions. I'm sure you must have heard that a lot, like during coach training, an encouragement or your trainer telling you, your mentor, whoever, don't ask why questions. So today I'd like to reverse it and ask you, what's your favorite why question? Go ahead and type it in. What is your favorite why question that you would like to ask your client? If you had the opportunity to ask, what would be your favorite why question? Ram, you want to say anything about why questions?
Yeah, let's see what people say.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, going back to what Vijay and Venkat said, the reason I say that it's a huge move for ICF to take out as a heading of a competency as powerful questioning and shifting it into something else is to show that the questioning itself is not the end, it's a means to an end. And it has to create awareness, it has to keep the communication going. Earlier, the fact that it was a separate heading as a competency, it looked as if it is one of those things which is fundamental to coaching. It is not. It is purely a means to an end. If you really want to be phenomenally powerful in questioning, don't come to coaching. Follow the Socratic method, which is all about questioning. And in fact, the most powerful questioning, the question in the world, is the why question. That's a beginning of all inquiry. It's the most powerful in terms of any scientific invention, any scientific discovery. The reason why we may not overuse it in coaching is because in our bringing up, in our conditioning, the why is very often used, especially when we are children, as a reprimand rather than one of curiosity. So in psychological learning theories, the why question has been found to invoke a certain amount of negativity, which is why, for example, those of us who have gone through NLP training seriously or transaction analysis, the why question is usually discouraged. Reframe it, the same why being asked as, what is it that is making you do this, rather than why are you doing it? Because the client may have had an upbringing where the parental questioning always was, why did you do this? Why couldn't you have done it differently? So automatically it is taken as a directive, authoritative, controlling kind of question, which is probably the only reason. However, if we are able to phrase the why question in a much different way, that's one part of it. And many of the questions that, why you are saying this, why do you consider this, why is this happening to you, why may you look at it in a different way, all these are possibilities. But coming back to things like, what else? Can you tell me more? Personally, I think I would call them the lazy coach's questions. When you have nothing else to think about, when you haven't even listened to the client properly, these are the kind of questions that will come up, which are filler questions. If you wish to really ask a what else question, or what more, make it relevant to the context of what the client has said. The client should feel acknowledged. If you were sitting on the client's seat, how would you know that the coach has really listened to you? The coach has heard you. Unless the coach responds, sharing some of the things that you have said. At the end of it, if you want to add a question, is there anything else that you would like to say? Is there anything more that you would like to add? What else will help you in terms of move from this position to another? That's fine. One of the problems, I know that a lot of people sort of talk eloquently about these single word questions. Occasionally, they are good. But please remember that in the way the coaching framework is defined, for a good reason, it's a partnering journey, which is about sharing and acknowledging and appreciating and observing. All these mean that you cannot continue a total coaching conversation by just asking monosyllabic or 2-word or 3-word kind of questions. It is important that the client feels cared for. It is important that the client feels that the coach is listening. At least a substantial bulk of the kind of questioning should come from deep listening, which in turn results in sharing. And here, very often, coaches are told, you shouldn't share because that is judgmental. To me, that is absolutely nonsense. The whole partnering in coaching is about how you share, but at the same time, non-judgmentally, intuitively, if you can. What is it that you are sensing? What is it that is coming up for you as you listen to the client? Those of you who are familiar with supervision, which tremendously enhances your ability to coach better, in the 7I model of Peter Hawkins, that sharing of what the supervising coach feels about what the client coach is bringing to their table is probably one of the most powerful perspectives that the coach can offer to the client. So these may seem controversial. What I'm saying here is not the normal way coach training is being done. But believe you me, we are experimenting with this for the last few years. And we find that is enormously helpful if you follow the methodology of what I earlier talked about, based on acute listening, generative listening, acknowledging what the client has said, and sharing and sensing what the client has sensed, and then ask a question, it's always going to be far more powerful. And more, I'm speaking as an assessor for MCC level recordings. The really phenomenally powerful coaching happens when all these come together in a dance. I'm not saying you cannot ask a what else. Once in a while, yeah, sure. If the client is in a kind of a pensive mood and still is reflecting, yeah, I would hold for a while. If the client is not saying anything, count to 5 and then say, hey, what else are you thinking about? What's going on with you? But that should come from deep listening and very powerful observation of what the client is doing. Yeah, let me stop.
So Vijay, I recall from our MCC classes, your why questions. What is your take on why questions?
I just had this intuition you're going to go there, Cindy. Hopefully my answers are more evolved now. Okay, so I must give a bit of a context. I think when I came into coaching, I come from I think Ram mentioned it beautifully, right? Socratian approach, right? I come from 5 years of grounding in law. I come from, I'm very proud of my scientific temperament. So for me, without the why, it just feels like I'm blind and navigating around, not knowing where to go. I'm being very vulnerable here, right? So when I was first told in coach training that don't never go near the why, my first question was why, right? I didn't get it. I was not convinced. Sure, to pass my SEC recording, I ensured I didn't put in my why, but it was really holding me back. And I think thanks to the mastery journey, Cindy, and I must sort of, acknowledge the patience you and Ram had with a lot of my why questions. Okay, but I think it allowed me the space. Yeah, I think it allowed me the space to really figure out what it was doing for me. Again, right, I think it's about the spirit of inquiry. Yeah, so I think for me, it was not about the why, but, holding back your spirit of inquiry as a coach, even, right? Not that, hey, I've got to crack this puzzle first, just out of curiosity, right? Trying to partner with this other human being to, help them seek answers or solutions or whatever. So yes, I think as long as why comes from a space of curiosity, inquiry, and partnership, I don't personally hold back, though of course that little voice, cognitive voice, keeps coming up saying, be careful or whatever, right? But so I still do slip into the why, but I'm very mindful it does not come from a space of judgment. So the moment I feel I'm going there because I am trying to question the client, there's a difference between inquire and question. I think that's where I hold back. I say it's not in the right spirit. So I think it's a thin line of difference, but I would feel very uncomfortable as a blanket rule to keep it off. As long as it fits into the larger scheme of things. That's where I would like to try.
Yeah, Vijay, before Cindy moves on to others, I just want to point out, I think you proved my point. Coming from a lawyer's background, a lawyer uses the why question on inquisition, not inquiry, to threaten people, to make them defensive. This is a reason why psychologically the why question is avoided, because it can become a tool of inquisition if you're not careful. And those of you, if you know Socrates' history, he was poisoned and killed, probably because there were others who felt that they were being subjected to his inquisition. But coaching should be inquiry. Like Edgar Schein says, it should be the humble inquiry. Of course, you can use the why in a humble inquiry. Therefore, the whole questioning, I would ask the client, what is your intent? Is it a humble inquiry? Or is it a threatening inquisition? For whose benefit is that question being asked? Is it for creating the awareness of the client, or is it for some idiotic reason that you want to know more, like a voyeur? What's going on here? Are you a peeping Tom trying to figure into the mind of the client? So I think that is what should determine how the question should come from, which is why if you listen to the client and use a client's word to reproduce the acknowledgement of what the client is and let it lead to a question, you are in a much safer space being in humble inquiry.
Yeah. Venkat, not to leave you out. Yeah, there's a few things playing in my mind to say, but I want to invite you first. And maybe not about the why question, because I think we all know how much Vijay loves that. So we leave that to her. But what are questions that don't sit well for you? If you're being coached, what are some of the questions you don't like being asked? You're on mute, Venkat.
I will play this that, the questions that I don't like asked. I would actually also bring in that same question, why? And I'll also say this that that's one. I'll say a couple of more, I'll coming from a corporate background. Years back when I started this journey, in an organization, you are taught to keep asking why and why not. I think these are two important questions that in any organization, did you do your target? Why not? Was this job not completed? Why not? Why did this go wrong? So this is something which is so guys like me, when I started 4 years back, this was something which was quite heavy on my head also, that easy to ask the why not question. And then of course, a lot of discussions with you and Ram made me understand that what does it do. Now thinking back, what I've also realized is that probably, if I use the transactional analysis, part of it, it's almost like, we are all conditioned that a parent, right at the childhood, the parent asks a child saying, why did you do this wrong, or why did you do this mischief? So that there is something which kind of triggers a response which is a bit negative when one hears a why question, and there is typically a defensive response and not really a inquisitive a response to an inquisitive question. So that is the reason why I think the why word is not a great thing. And so I've also been pretty uncomfortable when when people have asked me saying why. So that's something which the second thing is that the questions which are, instead of trying to understand more about what I'm thinking or where I am, sometimes coaches do ask about questions like uh, they want to understand more about the topic on for example, if I'm talking about something that happened me and somebody else, and they ask a question saying that can you explain more about it, trying to probably in their mind they're trying to understand what happened in that transaction. So questions which are purely, and I'll say this, that when I'm in a coaching session, I like questions which are more emotive in nature, and I don't like too many questions which are very rational in nature. This is about me as a human being, because I have found that when a question is asked from an emotive stage, I have found that I have got a lot of value as a client. Now I'm talking as a client. When people have asked very rational questions, I'm not enjoyed it, because then one of the typical things that tends to happen is that brown water starts flowing. One starts talking about the what has happened and stuff like that, and really going away from the issue on hand.
Yeah. So coaches or participants, we'd love to hear from you. What are questions you don't like being asked if you're the client? And what are questions that sit well with you?
Yeah, Cindy, Hayden has put in something here. the question that makes him squirm is, what if you were wrong about that? And I quite agree.
Me too.
Any
Me too.
coach who uses even that word, forget about the question, doesn't deserve to be a coach, because it doesn't show anything about unconditional positive regard. Of course, it can be rephrased in many other ways. That what if there was another perspective, whatever it is. But if a coach is trying to point out what is wrong, that means the mind of the coach is really working in terms of finding faults with the client and trying to figure that out. So there could be many other questions, but I just want to go to something else a little bit. It is not merely the questions. It is a kind of any response, and someone else pointed out, it's not just the words of the question, but it's a tone, voice tone. And Cindy and I, in fact, have been discussing in some cases about this. And I had this huge problem in my journey to mastery. One of the areas where Cindy helped me as my mentor powerfully was in terms of my shifting, modulating my voice. Even a normal kind of a statement or a question would come out as something very directive, very authoritative in the way that I said that. So it makes a huge difference in terms of how the voice tone and the way that we ask a question, or even the facial expressions, may completely shift the impact of a question from something which is potentially a directive one to a much more respectful one, or vice versa. Another one is, which we often talk about in class, I think the two players are here, Cindy and Vijay both. So during one of the conversations, Cindy said to Vijay was coaching Cindy, and said, you know, Vijay, I'm trying to explain a situation to you where I like to be helped. I need support. So you are like the person looking at me that I am inside a well, and instead of helping me, putting your hand out to pull me out, you also decide to come into the well and sit with me. And it doesn't help. That's the difference between sympathy and empathy. So if even something as simple as that, if you are able to differentiate, if you're able to visualize that metaphor, at what point in time as a coach are you really trying to get into the well and sit by the side of the client because you feel so emotionally involved? It doesn't help you. You need to be disengaged, but at the same time, you should be able to put your hand down or hang a rope down or whatever to pull the client up. So it's not just about the questioning. Questioning is just one part of it. It is about how the coach partners the client. It's about how the coach responds to the client, creating that trusted, safe space of presence so that the client can open up more, the client can be more vulnerable. That is a whole point of questioning. If it becomes something like a tool or a technique for the coach to display the coach's skills, it has no place in coaching. Over to you, Cindy.
Cindy, can I just jump in? Not on the well, because that's a story that will take a long time. But I thought that was quite a nice memory Ram brought back. But one of the questions that I would find, I know it was not asked for me, but it was just coming to my mind is, as a client, you would have said it, right? I mean, you would have explained something once, maybe twice. And when the coach asks you exactly that question, I don't know, I mean, as a client, I feel a little impatient that, if the coach is asking you, and I would be left wondering, especially if it was, practice sessions or something, saying, did this coach really not get it? Wasn't she listening to me? And it would kind of take away, the whole process. I think Ram did mention, right, asking questions to what you already know answers for. I don't even think it's about knowing the answers sometimes. I just think we are not listening. And those questions are the worst. However, powerful they seem, however cool they are horrible.
And that question, how are you feeling? Like, I mean, it's a valid question when it is within a context, right? So if you see some change in the client, you would check in, how are you feeling? But not like it's some kind of a fuller question, and every 10 minutes or so, so are you feeling? And how are you feeling? And I want to go, you did nothing to create any kind of shift or change or no movement in the coaching. You're asking me how I'm feeling. I'm feeling the same.
The other one is, what are you thinking? That's another one,
exactly,
especially
right? Because you're sharing your thinking, and you're being asked, what are you thinking?
Correct. And sometimes coaches discomfort with long silences, right? I mean, it's part of the process. It's part of the space the client needs. And you're so impatient with that 2 minutes or whatever, 1 minute extended silence, you jump right and say, hey, so what are you thinking? So it's like, as a client, I just feel like saying, can you just give me some time to think?
Yeah, so what we're saying, I'll summarize. It sounds like questions should have a common sense approach and should match the context of what's going on in this partnership between coach and client. And we're talking about this word inquiry, it should be an inquiry. I also like the word invitation. It should be an invitation to the client, like a curiosity question, is mostly quite powerful and placed as an invitation. You're inviting the client into a space, especially if the coaching has reached a stale point, meaning there's no movement. You can invite the client into a new way of approaching it, or a new way of thinking, or using this embodies the coaching mindset, the difference, a different way of doing something. I guess it all equates to this word that these words that belong to the definition of coaching: thought-provoking and creative. And I have no issue with a why question that's asked with, as you said, Vijay, curiosity of a child. When children ask why questions, somebody said this on the chat, it's quite intriguing and you're quite absorbed by the why question and you want to answer it. So there's some kind of childlike element that draws you to that why question. But the why question that's judgmental is definitely a no-no.
Cindy, there's a comment here, Shamin, and then there's one by Pat. On the virtual platform, the coach's presence is vitally important: body language, eye contact, etc., voice. But Shamin, Pat, all of you, I would like you to think about coaching by telephone and not necessarily using a Zoom. What happens then? There's a lot of us who do a lot of coaching just on the phone, where people cannot see your eye movements or body movements or whatever it is. But you can still make your presence felt just by modulating your voice, just by choosing the words appropriately. And presence is not necessary as a visual presence. Presence is a state of mind. Presence is created by the space that you create for the client to feel safe and open up. So I just would like to leave this with all of you. Don't think for a moment that if you're not being seen, I mean, it's like there are many people who used to tell me earlier, oh, we can only do face-to-face coaching or face-to-face training. We cannot do it virtually. Of course, now the new normal is you have no option but to do it virtually. And therefore the video platform. Sure, I'm not sort of in any way disagreeing, saying that the Zoom is a fantastic device and you're able to see people. But my question is, what then happens if you're not able to use a Zoom, but you are forced to use just a telephone? Can't you not coach? Of course you can coach. So we need to learn those skills of how we establish our presence just through our voice. And it should be possible. And once you're able to get that right, you would be able to do well in any other medium as well, whether it's a virtual medium or whether it is a face-to-face medium. I just want you to be aware of it rather than getting very, very focused on that, you know, we cannot create presence. Presence is created by how you show up for the client. And that is about how much you care for the client, which in turn depends upon how you're able to make the client feel included, acknowledged, appreciated, and accepted. And the more you are able to use the client's words to reproduce, to play back, and then follow up with your question, which is why we keep saying, don't ask orphan questions like, what else, what more, or just like that, without a context. Always establish a context, because the context brings the client into the conversation. Otherwise, just asking a question, however smart maybe, it excludes the client. And you can actually see the difference in terms of how this can happen in a real conversation. Try it out and see the difference for yourself.
And have you noticed, many of you may have already, had a chance to notice this. Have you noticed that silence sometimes comes across as a question? Like in a moment of silence, you'll find the client come up with an answer. Then you wonder, is there a question in silence? We've reached the end of our time, and it's been wonderful, exploring pieces of powerful questions. And we'll continue to do so next year when we're paying more attention to the updated core competencies and PCC markers one at a time. Of course, within context of something more interesting, we'll unpack the markers and core competencies. But now I'm going to go back to the panel and do some closing thoughts on powerful questions. So any thoughts showing up for you, please go ahead and share. Vikut, you want to start?
Yeah, the point that I'll just touch upon with what Ram has said also, I'll share many a times I have found when I close my eyes or I don't have the video, I find it many a times lot more comfortable listening to the client. So this point about having a face-to-face, is always important, is not necessary. Many a times, it's finally, I know we may step into something more than what coaching says. There is something called the waves of two people kind of join up together when you actually are able to, you're actually not speaking mouth to ear and mouth to ear. It's actually heart to heart that actually comes through. And that's what brings the bonding between the client and the coach. And that's what leads to a superior way of coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Vicky?
So Cindy, when you were asking this question about what does silence do, I recalled a conversation with you quite some time back. It was a video conversation. It was on a topic that I think was quite meaningful, personal, and a lot of the conversation was not even silence, right? I mean, I know it sounds a little dramatic to say it, and I have actually after that found that power in many conversations is when you question not just with your silence, but just even with your eyes, right? Sometimes you don't have a verbal medium available, the auditory medium, can you still use other senses? So what I want to actually leave triggered by that thought is powerful questioning, like any of the other techniques, like silence or metaphor, or anything else that we might use. If we can find a more embodied way to do it, that I think works for the client and our relationship with the client, I think that's really at the heart of it. So, my invitation to all the coaches here on today's call is, can we bring in a lot more embodiment and embodied presence into our practice as coaches?
Well, thanks, Vijay. I'll round up, and I'll say something and later I'll round up. Exactly, I'm going to pull out from what you're saying or continue from what you said, because that's, for me, is one of the greatest values we could leave our client with, is noticing what's going on in their body, or if there's energy changes or something more there, the unknown or the unsaid that's going on, and picking that up, either in an inquiry or a question or an invitation, to create this kind of whole body experience that the client goes through in coaching. Because at the heart of it, it really is all about the person, right? And their internal changes as ripple effects outside. But at the heart of it, it is all about the person. So I love that kind of embodied, or using the total body of the person you're coaching as their own best resource, and bringing out the potential of a client. Ram, I had my say, and over to you to round up.
Yeah, sure. I just put in the password because several of you were asking if you want to claim your CCU. Somebody's asking what is the password for. It's Turkey. I don't know. Magda is supposed to give the password, but I'm giving it without her permission. So use that.
Oh, you mean like Christmas turkey? Turkey. Good.
Well, Thanksgiving turkey. Okay, I don't know, whatever it may be. Someone had asked about, I think Francois asked a question about, what about clean language? Yeah, clean language, nonviolent language, those kind of frameworks are Crucial Conversations by Patterson and so on. These are extremely useful in terms of formulating. But one of the most powerful lessons that I had was, if you have the chance, try and learn more about Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson had this extraordinarily cyclical way of expressing himself, which many people said would put them to sleep. Like Richard Bandler used to say that whenever I heard Milton Erickson, it put me to sleep. But 2 days later, I would wake up and start doing exactly whatever he has said. So it's an extremely powerful subliminal way of getting into your subconscious, unconscious mind. There are multiple ways of doing it. So very often, it's not what happens in the session. The way that you ask the questions, leave statements and leave it with the client. You might find that something really the client picks up a few days after that. And then they come back and say, hey, this is what you said. At that point in time, I didn't realize what it meant. But now that I have reflected on it, is something very different. So I would also just like you to ponder about this, that it's not about just what you ask in that session and what is responded by the client in terms of creating awareness. Coaching is a journey. It is not like an ICF assessment that it has to happen in that snapshot of one session. It's a journey which takes over several sessions. So what is it that you ask, and how is going to create an impact in the client over a period of time when the client reflects on that? So one of the things that you might all like to do is with the clients is to have them reflect on whatever the session has brought to them. Journal if they can, and do some work on that. And what happens between the sessions, it's like people say, like we talked about, silence between the space between words. Similarly, like they say in music, the space between the notes is really what makes the music. The same way, I think it's a space between the sessions that we have in coaching, which can be extraordinarily powerful if we know how to use them. So use them as well. And we're not really talking about just passing an ICF or EMCC kind of an examination, but really, how do we make ourselves far more useful to the client? Thank you all. For those of you, wherever you are, Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. For others, happy gratitude. Thank you. Bye. Take
We'll
care.
see you at the end of December. Happy holidays and vacation to those that are going on holiday. And stay safe. We'll see you at the end of December.